Hello and welcome to a Rogue Entity tutorial. My name's Suits. In this tutorial series, we're just going to cover the setup of a RTS selection subsystem. This is a follow-on from the general overview of subsystems that I did, and we're going to convert I've done a selection setup before, but what we're going to do is put it into a module and have that module contain the subsystem so we can easily drop that into a project where we want to use it. The outline for this session will be to create the new project. We'll create the module in our project, and then we'll create just the class for the selection subsystem. And then so we can essentially use our selection subsystem, we're going to create a camera plugin. So this is just a normal player camera, and we'll set up the inputs. And that will be part one of. If you have any questions about some of why I'm doing particular things and I haven't covered it enough, leave a comment. Also available on Discord for any general conversation and chats or help. So let's get started on part one. So let's start with creating a new project. I'm going to create a blank project, C++. Don't need any starter content. I'm going to call it, and we'll call this project, which I might add more to this project in the future. So I'm going to give it a generic name, and I'm just going to call it Rogue Systems. So that should give us our generic project, and I might just save this level. And then we'll come to project settings, maps and modes, and we'll set that to our level. When the editor starts up, I'll save us some time later. And then I'm just going to come to editor preferences, change this to main window. So that's new windows we open will come up in the tab, not as a new window. And that should be fine. I'll leave that open because I'll need that, but that's fine. Everything's saved, and I'm just going to close this and go to the C++ editor. So in the editor, I'm going to come into games, into our project here, and we're going to create our subsystem within a module. Now, I believe Rider has a function here to create modules. So if you click on your source and then go add Unreal module, you can do it that way. I have had troubles with that in the past, but I'm going to do it manual anyway, just to anyone that's not using Rider can do it this way. I'm actually not even sure if Visual Studio has that function. It probably does. Feel free to experiment with that if you've got it. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to create a folder. I'm going to call it Rogue Selection. That's going to be our module name. And then in that folder, we want to create add file. And we want to just call that Rogue Selection, same as the name as the module. I might copy that for future use. And we're going to create a H file and a CPP file. And one more file, we want to create a build, so rogue selection.build.cs file, which is C#. You can see the exact mirror of our actual project directory. Hint, hint, it's just a module, right? So anyway, so if you look into our systems, into our projects files, we want the exact same thing in these. So rogue selection.h, and then rogue system CPP. And obviously we need to change this to selection. Oops, don't have that. And this will be rogue selection, and this will be rogue selection. And yeah, it's probably going to correct shits for a bit, but that's all right. So then we'll go to our build, and we can give it this. But we can copy all of this into our build, and come back to here. I'm going to copy that again. So rename our module. I think they're the only places we need to do it. And I might just make these vertical. Like so. Might even do that in the rogue systems. Keep it all the same. This is just ordering it. It's not required if you don't want to do it. Find it easy to read. And then in our target.cs, we need to add a module. I'm going to duplicate that and paste in our selection. So that's telling it to load that module. And I think we need to do that in the other one as well, the editor one. Sure. And last but not least, in our uproject file, we have modules here. We want to duplicate this one, put a little comma in, and whoops, cut that out. I removed the comma. There we go. And it's runtime and it's default, that's fine. And now there is an ideal time to refresh our project. So I'm just gonna close all of those. All right, let's just close all these, close it all up, back to nothing. And then come into our project. Here for me, we're going to do derived cache, binary, intermediate, and the SLN. And then in here, if you've got Windows 11, you'll need to do show more options and generate Visual Studio project files. So it shouldn't take very long, and then we can reload and we should be in business. Now that we're back in the editor, we're just going to ensure this is on debug game because that's going to give you more debug information, but we'll just do a quick build, make sure it is all happy with what we just added. I was all happy with that. There is some warning somewhere. Probably some crap. Visual Studio compiler's out of date. Right, it doesn't matter. And now we'll create our subsystem. So we're going to come to our rogue selection, and we are going to create an Unreal class, and we can search for our, in here, we can search for our local player subsystem. And we're going to call it rogue selection subsystem. And I'm going to put it in the public and private separated folders, and I'm going to put it in a subsystems folder. I don't think there'll be any more than one, but keeps it tidy. There we go, we've got a subsystem created. We're going to come into the parent and into that parent, just so we can copy this. Whoa. Okay. And so we're going to, let's writer change their comments anyway. So we're going to create a public section and we're going to add those. We also want a constructor, just a generic constructor. And these are going to be overrides. Oops. And oh, I made it as a function, sorry. Yeah, at least that created properly. Why won't it let me create these over? Oh, they're implemented here, sorry. Just take those out and we'll actually generate those. There we go. I'm not sure there's actually anything we need to do for this subsystem in those, but there they are. So now that we have a subsystem, I'm super keen to continue on with this, but we're going to get to the end of this because we're making a selection system. We're not going to be able to test anything. So we need a player pawn, so a player camera, to move around and do input so we can then feed into this selection subsystem. And I was just going to slap it in the project, but what I'm going to do is I'm going to make it a plugin, and then you can use that plugin just to drop in when you need some basic input for this sort of case. So we are going to, we'll go, you can create through writer, you can create a plugin, sorry, plugins directory. I've never actually used this through Rider. I'm not going to use it now in case anyone's not using Rider, but I'm just going to go into the actual editor, go to plugins, click add, which will give you this options thing. I'm just going to create a blank plugin, and I'm going to call it Rogue Camera. Call it whatever you like. Fill in some data if you like or not, and then just click create plugin. So now we've got our plugin here. You can see it's almost the exact same setup. Oh, it's put in public and private folders, but the exact same setup as a module, except you've got a resources folder here, which has our plugin icon to show up. That's that icon there. And you can change that to whatever you like. I think it has to be 128 by 128 from memory. And then these other files, you'll see they're very similar, not exactly as the other module stuff. So you can, if you wanted to create a module, a plugin manually, you could actually copy the contents of these and rename what you need to do. But anyway, let's crack on. We are going to start with our pawn. Here somewhere, yep. So I'm going to call it, I might just abbreviate everything with RC, and I'll call it pawn. So RC stands for Rogue Camera. I'm just going to put this in, I don't know, a player directory. Or could just put it in the root directory, to be honest. Yeah, let's just do it in the root directory. Not going to be many files in here. Oh, so this is something that can happen when you create a plugin or a module, and if you don't rebuild, right? So you can see here it's pretty much lost the connection to the Unreal Engine framework or whatever. So I'm just going to go and delete those temporary files again, like we did after we created the module. So in our Rogue Systems directory, just going to delete the SLN, intermediate, and binaries. Fix our errors. It should come up all good once it's done loading. It's going to start cleaning this class up. This is going to need an object initializer. If you've done any of my other player pawn, player camera tutorials, you could easily copy and paste a whole bunch of stuff from there, so you don't need to crack along like I'm doing. But if you haven't, we are going to do it now anyway. So this will be the data asset that is going to have the actions that we're going to use for input. So rather than just assign them individually in the class, we're just going to create a data asset that has them all in there. And then we can, using the AI assistant here, just to speed things up. So this input data asset here, we need to create that. So we're going to come into public here. I'm actually going to put this. So we need to create, this will just be a new data asset. I'm going to call it RC input data asset. I'm just going to put it in the directory, that's fine. So in here we're going to have a bunch of properties. The first lot of properties will be the settings for the camera, and then the second lot of properties will be the input actions. So think of this as like the default settings we're going to be doing. I'll change this to Rogue settings like that. And then a lot of these are going to come up because it's probably reading all my other project with this in it, but rotate speed, min pitch angle, max pitch angle. A lot quicker, isn't it? It doesn't go along. Min zoom. Start zoom. Good. Max zoom. Jump up. Move that one up. That. Zoom speed. We're not going to use segments. Just do float smoothing. Segments is to get the camera to move in larger chunks. And then this one will be input modifier. So like when you hold shift and stuff like that to speed things up. So that's sort of our default settings there. And then we need our input actions and our mapping context and all that. So we need a reference to those actual assets. And that, that's also why I created a plugin, not a module for this, because it's going to have actual assets. So a module is pure C++ code, whereas a plugin can be C++ code as well as assets in the editor. All right, so this first one, we'll make this, I'm just going to add a input on the end here, so it's under input, and then this will be input mapping context. No, it got moved from, that's not what we want. I'm just going to call it default mapping context. This one I was undo, and we're going to have to add, so this is not going to be happy. Yeah, so we're going to have to add enhanced input to the camera, rogue camera build.cs. So this is going to do it for us. So the rogue camera build.cs is here, and we're adding enhanced input under public dependencies. And that's so we can access the enhanced input systems. This will take a little while just to kick over, but it will sort itself out, so we'll crack on. Did I? Yeah, I did. So the next one is the priority. So this is what determines, if you have multiple mapping contexts, this determines which one has right of way based on the priority level. So if they have the same keys, one will overwrite the other. And then now we've just got all our inputs. So these could probably be edit defaults only. No, it doesn't matter. Let's just do it. There we go. See, the AOI code stuff for you, and it just lets you make mistakes. Not really a mistake, but oh yeah, we want this input on the end of all these. Copy this. Copy it from here. There we go. So this one's going to be a U input action. And yeah, it's going to be move, zoom, rotate, and then we've got our basic input select. And actually we might put one in for command also. Is that going to come up? Yep. And then we've got our modifier keys. So we're going to have, yeah, cool, it's coming up. So we'll do Shift, Alt, and Control. I think that'll be enough. And then I use a template to, actually this is outside the class in this file. Because this file is going to be referenced where we use these inputs, I'm going to just create these this namespace with some templates in it to help bind those actions. So it's going to be, I'm just going to call it RC input actions. So I'm going to change that to bind input, because that makes more sense. In here, we're going to have a template or two. So if you've never used templates before, it's just like it's like a function for code. So you can pass in parameters and it will put out the code using the parameters that you pass in. So this will be a template where T will be the object that we're binding to, and the function will, we actually pass in the function that it'll be bound to on that object. So this template is not coming up right because it's got two T's. I'm not sure why it's doing that, but I'm just going to tab it in. But this is not T here. This is the actual input system. So it's the enhanced input component, and then we just need to include the enhanced input component.h at the top. So that looks all correct. So you can see it's checking that the input's valid, the input component's valid, the action asset is valid, and the object we're passing in is valid. And so it's binding that action with the type of event to the object and the function. So this is one type of binding, and we want to do another. And this is, I've just called this trigger complete. So trigger only is when you just press the key and it triggers, it'll execute this binding. And then this one called trigger complete, it's not, I'm going to tab this in as well, but oh, it's got the input right. It's not coming up what I want here though. So there's actually three types of functions we want to pass in here, not two. So there's going to be by trigger. So there's three events that you can bind to. There's, oh yeah, that's actually the wrong trigger event too. It's not IE pressed. It's actually, that's the old system. So it's all triggered is what we wanted up here. And then copy this down. So there should be three things here. And the first one is started. So that means if it's a mouse click, say, you've pressed the key down. Then triggered is while the key is down, and then completed is when you let the button go. That's how that works. So this is going to be, call this complete function. This can be start func, and that's what needs to be up here. So we're passing in three separate functions for the start, hold, and trigger. So if you think about a box selection, which is what we're going to be doing, you press to start the box selection, you hold down to drag the box, and then you let go to select. They're those three events that we're going to be using there. Oh, okay, so I see why. It actually came up with the right thing. So this one here is, this was meant to be called start trigger complete. And then there was another, I'll put it in the middle here. Which is just trigger complete. So that was right, sorry. And that's cool how it updates the names that I was using. That's pretty cool. So yeah, that's got that right now. So this is just another one where I just want to, I don't need the start part, but I just want the triggered and complete. For those templates, we can bind any type of input that we need to. So this one is sort of like for like a key press. It'll go when you press, and it will go when you release. Okay, so let's see where we're going to use those. Now that we've got our data asset sorted. Oh yeah, we don't need this stuff open. We'll close our subsystem for now. Come back to that. So now we need a whole bunch of functions. So the first one will be, doesn't need to be virtual. Oh, should we make it virtual? Nah, I think we're going to leave it as, we can change something to virtual later if it needs to be virtual. So we're going to need an update function for updating the input events and stuff like that. We're going to need to set the player input defaults. Sorry, not player defaults. Set player input mode is what I want. It's not an override. So that's like, settings to show the mouse and stuff. And then we're going to want to set the control defaults. So that's applying those default settings we had on our data asset. That's what we're going to apply in there. We're going to assign an input mapping. We're going to potentially need a remove. Oops. Remove input mapping. I'm not going to call that one. I'm going to call this set default input. And that's just going to assign, actually let's just open the data asset. That's just going to assign our default mapping context by default and using the add input mapping here. This is looking for some forward declarations here. There we go. What else we got? All right, so now we need a function for each of our inputs. So I'm going to just call it input move. And that's going to, each of the inputs is going to take input action struct. So that's it there, the f input action value, and we need to include our input action value.h. Yeah, I think I might, add the include here. And that's a reference. Let's see if this is gonna, it's gonna give us the thing, awesome. So we've got zoom, rotate, select hold, select end. So that's those three inputs I was talking about for doing like a box select. Did we set up a command? I don't know if we did we? Oh, put it in. Can have a look at that actually. Did we do a command? Oh, we did. Yeah, we got the modifiers now, so we got Alt, Control, and Shift. We're going to need some functions to handle those modifiers, so we're going to have an update modifier function, and we're going to have a set modifier function. We're just going to need like a utility function here. We're going to call it get terrain position. Now we need to set up our actual pawn. So we're going to have private, actually we're going to have a protected section here. And we're going to have just a reference to our, so this value here is our actual data asset. And then once this is the generic reference, right? So once we cast it, we're just going to store a reference. So it'll be, what would we call it? RC input data. And that's going to include the .h. We'll just do it forward here. That's the actual input data, so we can read directly off that. We need a private section here, and we need to set up our actual pawn. So we need a camera and all that stuff. So we're going to do visible anywhere it should be. I'll just put that in, and then this will be, actually edit anywhere is fine. And then that's rogue settings, that's fine. Allow private access, so I could skip a bracket there. This will be just a scene component. That's fine. And I'll do another one. Blue. And this will be our camera component. And you'll need to include the camera component.h. sorry, we'll forward it here. We'll include it in the CPP, and then in this protected section here, we're going to add a bunch of properties that or variables that we're going to just use to manage our camera. So we've got our target location, we've got our target rotation, we've got our target zoom, and we want one for whether it's initialized or not. So that would just be a bool. We also need a struct for our modifiers. So I might just put that at the top here. So actually we'll need a enum as well. So do an enum, I'm going to add the class. I'm going to call this ERC modifier. And that's going to inherit off the uint8. There we go. Going to use just bit shifting here to keep track of what's what. So this will be 0, no modifier. Sorry, that's 0, 0. And then shift and alt. And then our struct. So the struct is so we can pass around the state of the modifier inputs. Oh, sorry, I didn't name the struct. I'm going to call it FRC. So that's generated that for us. You don't need this because it's public by default, but I like to have it in. So now we've got multiple in this, so we're not just going to have the one. And I want a constructor, so I can create a default. And I'm going to have, this will be bool and bool. Actually, we need 3 bools, and they're going to be, make the first one control. Alt. Shift. You can add whatever modifiers you want. You don't have to have just these. I'm going to default them all to false. There we go. So I come back to here. We're going to add property for the modifier key. Property for their states. RC. And I do have a template I normally use to set those modifier keys. I might just pop that down at bottom here. It's only going to be used in this class, so I'm putting it in the class, not on externally. And this is going to be a T struct, and so the class is going to be a type name, and this will be a type name T variable. So I'm just going to take this out, that's correct. But the inputs are right. So this is a struct, so I'm going to put this as struct to update. So this will be the modifier key type struct coming in. And then this t variable is going to be a member variable. So we just want to check, we're going to put sure put action value, so the value coming in will be true or false. We just want to confirm that it's a Boolean value. Otherwise, get out of there. So the struct. So what we're doing is in the struct, we're getting the variable of this type. So which one of these, and we'll pass that in. And we're setting it to the input that we passed in. So the input action value is the actual value of the key press. And then we're just going to call, actually we don't have that update modifier function here. So every one of these will do that. So now we can use this template in each of our modifier functions here. So first of all, let's just build all these functions. So now before we use this template, let's set up our update modifier function. And when we call update modifier, we want to call set modifier. And then in set modifiers, where we're going to call we're actually going to set the modifier key. And if you recall, that was a bit modifier, so we're going to be setting the bit with all the different modifiers in a single value. So the modifier key, first of all we'll reset it, and then we'll assess each key to see if it's been pressed, and that way we can store multiple values. So we want to set this to no modifier, and this executes, and then we're going to go through and check each modifier state. So the first one we'll do alt, and then we'll do control. And shift. And if you've got any others, you can just keep going there. And then what we want to do is set the modifier key So what we're doing there is we're taking our modifier key and we're doing a bitwise operation to OR it with whatever key we want to check. And then we're casting that result back to the modifier key so that the bit will be set on the modifier key to indicate whether alt is pressed or not. And the end result of that will be is the modifier key will have all the results of our modifiers. What we want to do in that. So that's that there. And then the second part of the update modifier will be to send the result to our player controller. Before we do that, we're going to now use our template here, and we can use that in the modifier inputs. So here. So here we're going to pass in the input action that's being happened, so whether it's on or off, the key types, and then the wrong name, there we go. So that'll, when the input modifier alt is pressed, it's going to go and call that update modifier, tidies it down to like a function call with the template. So then that'll result in this modifier key having all the processes set. And modifier key types will be the sort of like the source of truth of what's on and off at any given time. So the next stage here is probably our inputs. So our inputs, actually we need to bind our inputs. Let's do that. I just don't want to forget here. I'm just going to come back to throw that to where it needs to go. Let's move this up. This is where we're going to bind our inputs, or you could put it in a, I'm just going to put it under in play here. we need to get a reference to our enhanced input component. And you can see this is coming up with pretty much what we're going to do. It's not quite right, so I'm going to just do this manually for a bit. Just want to check that input is valid, and we also want to check that our data asset is assigned, since that's something that we need to assign in the editor. We definitely want to check that that's been done. So that's the input data asset. If both those things are good, then that input data asset, we will need to cast that to the data object, which is what we wanted to save in our input data variable. And we just need to cast that to our type, which was a input data asset. So now we just want to check that that is successful. And now we've got a reference to our default data setup. So now we're ready to bind our inputs, and we set up the namespace, the bind input, and then this is the three templates that we created to bind our actions. So for move, zoom, and rotate, the local ones to this pawn, they're all going to be just trigger only. And it's going to be going to pass the input system or component, sorry. And then on the input data, we'll have the action assigned that we want to bind to this. So it's a move. And then we want to pass this object and the function on this object that we want to bind that input action to. I'm hoping this will give us the next ones. It looks like it was going to. Yep, so that's zoom, same sort of setup. And then rotate is the next one. And then the next one is our select function. So if I'm just going to put this in, but so we're using the start, trigger, and complete like we talked about before. So it's one action, but it has three events assigned to different functions. So we've got the when you press, when you hold, and when you end. And the command one will be the same, just with those separate functions. So you can do, if you're to command some units is your right click, then you can select, hold, maybe you have a context menu come up or something like that, and then release is to execute the command. Or you can just press and it does it. All right, so now that they're done, we do need to set some defaults up here, because this is going to happen as part of the initialization of this pawn. So we want to call this function here. We want to set the player input mode there. And we want to set the input mode, what do we call it? Set player, set default input. So we want to load the default input mapping. So we're getting to our time limit now, about 45 minutes. So I'm going to end this session here. In the next part though, we'll continue on to finish off the player camera plugin. So we'll finish implementing these player inputs. We're going to create an interface so we can talk outside of this plugin to our project and our player controller, and then we'll actually create a player controller, and then we'll get into the editor, set up our input data, get the pawn actor in the game, and then test and adjust our camera settings and make sure that's all working so we can get back to our implementation of the selection subsystem. If you're finding this tutorial useful, give us a like and subscribe for the next update. Thanks for watching. I'll see you in the next part.